Hi, everyone. This is Joe with Joe Massaro Ministries. And I'm very excited tonight because we are going to be meeting somebody not for the first time, but actually for the third time, which I could not believe. Uh, Eva Marie Everson, so wonderful to see you again.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be back.
Well, we're talking about a Christmas book, so what a great time of the year to be doing that. But you have been with us, let's see, it was with Eric.
Yes, I can guard.
Yes.
Yes.
And we talked about a wonderful book. You want to just tell us a little bit about that real quick?
The Final Race,
Yep.
which is it's more of a biography of Eric Liddell, who won the 1924 Olympics, Olympic gold medalist in the 400, and of course the movie Chariots of Fire.
Yes.
Was the story of his interaction with Harold Abrahams, who was a Jewish runner who was slated against him in the 100-meter race. But when Eric found out that the 100 was on a Sunday, he chose to back away and run the 400 because he felt that the Sabbath was the Lord's day. And of course, that was the whole point of the movie, but it also meant that Harold Abrahams would not be running against Liddell, who he could not beat because Liddell was so fast, which meant that Harold Abrahams won the gold medal in the 100. But what most people don't realize, in the movie, Eric Liddell is getting on the boat to go to Paris, and he's told that he will be running on Sunday. That did not actually happen. He found out in October, I believe it was, the year before, the July, that he ran, and so he knew that he was not going to do it, and he endured months. Countrymen saying things like, you don't really love your country, and spitting on him, and saying it was a publicity stunt, and just really giving him a hard time. But in the meantime, he began training for the 400, which even his trainer thought was insane, because 400-meter runners are, they've trained for it their whole lives, basically. And to go from 100 meters, which is like fast, to 400 meters, you have to learn the whole pacing thing, etc. And so no one expected him to even place, much less win. He not only won, he broke world records, and so of course he gave all the glory to God. It's such an amazing story. But then at the height of his fame, walked away from all of that and went to China and served as a missionary. And he died in China during World War II in an internment camp, not because of what had happened to him in the camp, but because he had a brain tumor, and of course there was no medical help that they could give him. But he did so many wonderful things in that internment camp, right up to the point of telling those who were interned to love their enemy. Love your enemies, love your enemies, love your enemies.
Yes.
And when he died, it is said that even the Japanese wept, if it was a Japanese encampment, and that they gave him a burial of honor. I think he was, he wasn't just dumped in a grave. He was buried on the Japanese side, if I remember correctly, like where their soldiers were buried or whatever, and that even the Japanese cried. So it's just an amazing story of walking the way Jesus asked us to walk, being who Jesus asked us to be, just being Jesus with skin on. That was Eric Liddell. And even to this day, I mean, he is so well loved and revered in Scotland. That when I went to Scotland last year, walked into the hotel, and this particular hotel, they honor all of Scotland's greatest, their greatest artists, their greatest actors, their greatest everything. And as soon as I walked in, there was this huge portrait of him crossing the finish line, right there at the reservation desk. I said, so that was really a wonderful thing.
So let me just say that probably was one of my favorite interviews with the two of you.
Oh, thank you.
And one of my very favorite books. I just encourage you to get this book because you just touched briefly on what is in this book. And it is so fascinating. And because Chariots of Fire gets to the point where he wins the race, but you talk about everything,
Yeah.
so much that happens afterwards. And
Yeah, and even before, I mean,
yep,
being the son of missionaries, only seeing his parents a few times in his life. I mean, he, you know, it's one of the things that got to me the most about Eric Liddell was that he spent the majority of his life alone.
yeah,
You know, he was separated from his parents, and he was separated from his brother, then he was separated from his wife, and it just, you know, but it was all because of serving God. And then he was so willing to do that. He didn't think anything of it. And he didn't do this, oh, poor me, I didn't get to see my parents but 4 times after my 6th birthday or whatever. You know, he didn't do that. He saw it as an honor and a privilege to serve God the way he did. And it changed me in the writing.
yeah.
My prayer was that it would change people in the reading as well.
It certainly did. I will tell you, it certainly changed me. And there's photos in there. There's all kinds of wonderful things in there. So definitely get that book. And we're not even on the Ornament Keeper yet.
I know.
And we also talked about The One True Love of Alice Ann, which I absolutely loved as well. And you can just maybe mention briefly what that is about, and then we'll go into the Ornament Keeper and kind of introduce who you are.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, so The One True Love of Alice Ann, the wonderful thing about writing that is it really all started years ago when my great aunt, who died just the last couple of 3 years ago, she was in her late 90s when she died, but she just happened to mention something along the lines of she had married my Uncle Warner, who then went off to war, and she didn't see him again for 4 years. And I mean, I'm like, what? You know, I couldn't believe it. And then starting to hear other stories like that, you know, of people who, you know, couples who that was what 1940s. Their loved one was about to go off to war, so they got married very quickly,
Yep.
and then off they went. And then several years after that, my husband and I were visiting our elderly neighbors next door, and I happened to notice that he had a purple heart framed and hanging on the wall. And he told us the story of that. And somehow those two stories kind of came together for me. And I was sitting at my desk one day. I was editing Five Brides, which is another one of my books I had written, and it was getting ready to come out. But I was doing the final edit before we, you know, went to Blue Line, which is, you know, final print. And all of a sudden, this title just, I'm looking at my neighbor's house at the time, and this title popped into my head: The One True Love of Alice Ann.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I don't know what that means, but I like it. So I wrote it down. And so then I went back to editing, and all of a sudden, like I said, those two stories just merged together in my brain like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I'm putting this aside. And I started working on the premise for Alice Ann. And so it's what happens, you know, what happened to the people who were left behind. I mean, we often read those war stories, you know, about the soldiers, etc. But what about the soldiers who stayed stateside, the women who went to work, the teenagers and children who worked, the way this country came together, and especially, you know, letting go of our loved ones when they went off to fight. And I did a lot of interviewing. Of course, the teenagers of those days are now elderly. Yes. And so I interviewed those who were about preteen to teen. I read a ton of books, a lot of letters from the war days, and I put this story together. And it was one of my favorite stories to tell. And I was so thrilled because it came out in 2017, and it was listed as one of the top 10 inspirational stories for books for 2017 by Booklist. And that for me was just, oh yeah, that just put a cherry on top of the cake. As far as I was concerned, it was like, wow, I couldn't believe that. But a lot of work went into it, and I'm very proud of that book.
Well, you should be, because I absolutely loved it. And there's another great book to get. Okay. So, but we haven't even gotten to the one we're going to be talking about, but
yeah.
just explain a little bit about who you are. You want to share a little bit about who you are,
Sure.
and we kind of connected a little bit as well through Word Weavers International.
Right.
So kind of maybe put that in there as well as
Okay.
you
All
talk
right.
about
Well,
yourself.
that's one of the first things I say is I'm the president of Word Weavers International, which is an international group of writers. Our goal at Word Weavers is to, offer education when it comes to writing, that iron sharpening iron type
Mhm.
of thing, always honing the talent and the that God gave you, turning that talent basically into a craft. So we're about community, we're about critique, we're about conferences. Those are the 3 C's. But we're also about education, because we as writers, we should be learning, learning, learning. And so it's about building writers up. And then once we've got that talent honed, and of course that's a continual thing, but once a writer is ready for publication, getting them to conferences, getting them in front of editors and agents, etc., teaching them what they need to know and what they need to do, but then also working within the writing community as a whole. So while we own Florida Christian Writers Conference, we are also very active behind the scenes at the other conferences as well. So I'm kind of I guess you could say, a common face that you'll see at writers conferences. It's just all about building those writers, because having the talent is one thing, but what you do with the talent is another.
Yes.
And so that's kind of what we're all about with Word Weavers. We're over 1,000 members strong. We're almost 24 years old. We started with 5 people sitting around a dining room table saying,
And you were one of those people, weren't you?
and I was one of those people. Yes, there were 5 of us, and we just were like, okay, we want to write, or we do write in some form of ministry. I was writing for a children's ministry at the time, which I still think is hysterical, but that's where God put me. But I mean, again, it was one of those things where I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know anything about writing for children's ministry. I know nothing, but somehow I landed in that position. But that was God getting me to that first meeting. And
Mhm.
of course, everything kind of exploded from there. But there were just 5 of us just wanting to build each other up as writers, and what can we do, and this and that. But, and then it grew to a 501c6 ministry, and what we're doing today. So 24 years later, woo.
So now, if somebody wanted to contact you, I know there's a thing about your website. So it's Eva Marie Everson author.com.
Author.com. Yes, I had evamarieeverson.com for years. And I started noticing that a lot of my writer friends had that author so-and-so or so-and-so author. And I thought, oh, that's the way I'm going to go. And so I did that. And then one day I got this text message from a friend who said, since when are you a political activist? And I said, what are you talking about? She said, your website, it says you're a writer, a journalist, and a political activist. And I said,
I
I
know.
have no idea what you're talking about. So she calls me and she said, I'm at evamarieeverson.com. I said, there is no evamarieeverson.com. I shut it down. And she said, you better type that in. So I did. And somebody is name squatting. So I called, it was like GoDaddy or something like that. So I called GoDaddy and I said, look, I have already done my research. I'm the only Eva Marie Everson in the world. And so they did their research and they came back and they said, you're right. But for us to shut this down, you will have to trademark your name. Well, let me see if I can add that to my list of things to do. I'll have to get an attorney and papers will have to be filed and I'll have to pay money. And I'm like, and I thought, just whatever. So I actually reached out to this person and because there was a way to contact him or her.
Mhm.
And then they shut that down. As soon as I contacted them, they shut it down. So it's somebody, I think, being spiteful. I don't know why, or just, riding on my coattails. Again, don't know why. They don't post very often, but I occasionally get emails from people saying, oh, you're into juicing. Oh, you just bought me furniture. I'm like, no. Sorry.
So let me just mention conferences, because I will tell you that I went to my very first conference probably 4 years ago. Absolutely a newbie, scared to death.
Yeah.
And I went by myself.
Oh.
And yeah. And the minute I walked in the door, the people were just so wonderful.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, and I have to tell you, I interviewed Ben Cooper yesterday, a friend and author, and one of the things we talked about is just the love and the caring between authors and the people involved in conferences.
Yeah.
And it is just a wonderful community. So I just encourage you to connect with Word Weavers International. And I know we've had a year of a lot of changes in conferences. But so what do we got next year for conferences, by the way? I don't want to forget that.
I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but as the director of Florida Christian Writers Conference, we are certainly, I certainly talk to a lot of other directors, and I know that Blue Ridge will happen. I know the Asheville Conference is going to happen. That's in, I think, February. And then Blue Ridge, which is in May.
Mm-hmm.
I just got a note from Lynn Johnson at Right to Publish that she's going forward at this point. We'll be up and running in October as we were this year. I'm not sure if there are any others. I haven't heard yet. But
I'm registered for
back in the water.
So Speak Up is in July, so I'm not sure. It was virtual this past year, Carol Kent,
right.
So I'm not sure what will happen there this year.
I don't know.
I want to come. I'm praying that I'll be able to come in October.
Oh, we would love to have you come in October.
I would just really want to be there.
The thing too about we were one of the first ones that said we're going for it. I'm trying to think. There was one other in the summer. Oh, let me think. Montrose up in Pennsylvania, but they had to stop literally, I think, in the middle of the conference because the governor announced that he was about to shut the state down.
Yes.
They had to get everybody home. So, of course, I was biting my nails for the October conference, but we went with it. And, it's one of those things where I just knew in my heart it was going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And everybody, not everybody, but several people said, "You're crazy. You shouldn't do it. What are you thinking?" But every time I would think in terms of canceling, I would get that overwhelming sense, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. One of my biggest concerns was that we would not meet our financial, end up. But not only did we were able to cover all of our expenses and still have a little bit money left over for next year, which we always look to do because, even keeping your website up costs money every month.
Sure it does.
So, we were good. We were able to hold back the amount of money that we like to hold back for the coming year. And then, I held my breath for about 3 weeks, and there was nobody called me and said, "I'm sick," so, and by that point we were going into the Blue Ridge Conference, and that was my first time getting on an airplane since, it was announced we're shutting everything down. So I was a little trepidatious about that just because it was like, this is going to be different. But it went fine. And so far, so good. Nobody has contacted the director, the assistant director, or me. I'm the contest director at Blue Ridge, and said, "I'm sick." So
it's good. That's awesome.
And we just all did everything we could do. Everything, the hand washing, the mask, the hand sanitizer,
distancing.
I mean, even at my conference, because I stay in the office just about the whole time, except when I'm on stage, I'm, I'm doing all the work back, the back end of it, getting checks written out and all of that. And if I darted out of my office, not remembering to put the mask on, and somebody stopped me, which always happens when I dart out of the office, I would just I would take a step back.
Yeah. And
I made sure we had 6 feet between us. Mm-hmm. When I would speak, I would often do like this, just to be aware. And I think that's what it's all about. So I think like Lynn Johnson said, if we cancel 2 years in a row, it's just going to have terrible repercussions.
Oh yeah, I so agree. All right, let me ask you one more question, then we're going to talk about the book.
Okay.
How many books have you written?
40, I think.
40. Wow. That's
amazing. Yeah.
That's amazing. So we're talking Christmas, the Christmas ornament or the Christmas keeper. I have to tell
The
you that,
Ornament Keeper.
yeah, what did I say? The Christmas keeper? Oh my gosh. I'm like so in love with the cover. So
Don't you love the cover?
I love the cover, the Ornament Keeper. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the cover. That's why I wanted to have it up there. I just, I'm a Christmas person.
Yeah, me too.
I know you are. And my mother was a Christmas person. And so I think I got that from her. So, but okay, so let's just talk. How did the book come about? There's always a way that books come around and you think about
Yeah.
them. So
Well, years ago, I was speaking to a gentleman who is a songwriter. He's a songwriter for a particular country artist. A lot of, he writes a lot of the songs for this particular country artist. And he was telling me how this song came about. And it's called Pictures on Mantles. And he said that his parents were going through a divorce, and that when his mother was moving, and I'm probably messing this up, but this is this is my version of it. When she was taking all the family photographs off of the mantle over the fireplace. It just struck her what was dying, and that the family was dying, the marriage was dying, this whole thing was dying. And she determined that her husband and his father, should try to figure this thing out. And they did. And so we had actually toyed around with what if we could turn that into a book. It almost sounds like a Hallmark movie kind of a thing. But nothing ever came from that. And yet that story would play around in my head a pretty good bit. I had particular scenes actually that just kept jumping in. And so I got a phone call from New Hope Publishing. Their associate publisher called me. She's a very good friend. And she said, we want a Christmas novella. Do you have any ideas? And I said, well, let me noodle on it for a little bit. And that story popped back up, and I thought, well, what in the world does that have to do with Christmas? I don't think it has anything to do with Christmas. And then I thought, well, what if it wasn't pictures? What if it was ornaments? And what if this? And what if that? And I just kept playing with it until the storyline formed itself. So it starts with the germ of something, but then it becomes something else. And so started off with a woman Felicia, whose husband has left 6 months earlier. He feels that the marriage is just broken. She feels that the marriage is broken, but she's very sad by the whole thing because there are 3 children. They want Christmas, and she is saying, I don't want Christmas. She and her husband married at Christmas. There was a lot of turmoil around that marriage and that first couple of years. But every year, her husband would give her an ornament to commemorate the year. And what she really doesn't want to do is take those ornaments out of the box. So she's telling the kids no tree. And the kids are tree. So
what do you mean no tree?
What do you mean no tree? Exactly. And so she, of course, gives in to her children's wishes. But as she and her soon-to-be ex-husband are dealing with the whole children, holidays, split family situation, she's unwrapping those ornaments, and each ornament takes you back to what was happening in their marriage at that time. And it all centers around a misunderstanding and a lack of forgiveness over something that was really trivial. And that actually came about from my own experience, not as a divorcee, but my parents divorced after 26 years of marriage. And it was not until years later that my mother realized that she had been blaming my father for something that he really had never done, or had no control over, I should say. And that she had kind of harbored that. And it was so interesting because when they, 26 years of marriage, and they split and they never spoke.
Mm.
And as I watched my mother reconcile with that, they were able to at least be friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even sure what might have happened after that, how far that friendship would have, I don't know that they would have ever remarried, but I think that friendship would have really been cemented again. But my father died suddenly. And then 4 years later, my mother died. So, but they were very friendly at the end. And so I think that was a good thing. And just even that my mother realized that everybody had a part to play.
Yeah.
She had a part, he had a part. It wasn't just he had a part, um, and so that kind of influenced what caused their separation, the characters in the book.
And it covers a period of time in their lives when they're young, and then it goes to obviously what you were just talking about. And I love how you take it from one chapter going back and another chapter to the current situation. Yeah. But I love Christmas ornaments, by the way. So yes. I was just thinking that I have an ornament. My oldest daughter, just turned 50. And I still have an ornament from when she was a baby.
Yeah.
And my husband and I are actually in the process of making ornaments to mail out to our family members that we will not see, because we're in Indiana, and yes. I just have one family member close, but everybody else is in New York from where we are. And so we've decided to do that and just start that as a tradition.
I like it. Yeah. That was, with, when Felicia and Jackson marry, they're just dirt poor. They were students, and they're dirt poor, and they can't afford to give each other anything for Christmas. But he jokingly says something about, I think there's something in your stocking. Mm-hmm. And she goes to the toe of the stocking, and there's just the little, I call them the cookie dough mm-hmm. ornaments, they look like cookie dough. They may even, I don't know if they're made from cookie dough, but anyway, they're hard. Yes. And it's like a Mr. and Mrs. Claus, but I think they're little mouselets, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you got it.
They're little mice, little Christmas mice, but it's like Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and it says Our First Christmas. And
that became a tradition for them.
And it became a tradition. So every year after that, he would put a special ornament in her stocking. And so there's I think 18, 19 ornaments when it starts. Yeah.
Yeah, just beautiful. So what do you think is, I know you talked about your parents and, and those kind of things. I know for myself, I thought about something as you were talking about, because I was married before, mm-hmm. and I'm now married 28 years to my husband. Mm-hmm. But before I was married, had all of my children with him. And I kind of blamed him for something I think that actually happened in our marriage. Yeah. And I realized later on in life, interesting that, and you're talking about this, that's why I'm bringing it up, is that I had a part to play in that. Mm-hmm. And it took me quite a while, actually.
Right. Yeah.
To recognize that. And it felt so good to actually recognize that.
Yes. And I felt that way for Felicia when she finally realizes. And actually, it's not so much that she realizes it, it's that she comes to understand that if she wants to be forgiven by God, she has to first forgive. Mm-hmm. And that is the commandment. And I remember saying to my mom that, when Jesus died on the cross for your sins, he was dying for daddy's too.
Yes, amen.
And the look on her face when I said that, but she knew I was telling the truth. And and honestly, there was like this moment where I felt like she thought I had betrayed her by saying that. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden that recognition that, yes, you are right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you grow so wise, my child? And I think that was kind of where it started. And so it's the same for Felicia. She comes to understand that, until she forgives Jackson for what she perceived,
Yeah.
That he had done, then she couldn't go forward. She couldn't go forward in her own life, in her own walk with God, until she did that. It didn't matter what happened to the marriage.
Right.
I mean, it does, but you know what I'm saying? That her first thing was to get right with God. And so there's that kind of internal war within her. Well, but I didn't do anything wrong, that thought, but I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you did, because you held on to anger and hurt and resentment and bitterness for 20 years. So yeah, you did.
Yeah.
And then of course it's that those words of wisdom from her children that she hates. How dare you be smarter than me? So,
well, picking up with the story of
they're one of my most favorite couples that I ever put together. They really are.
Oh, that is so sweet. Picking up the story of my ex-husband, one of the greatest things I have to say is one day, after all of these feelings and everything, I actually had a conversation with him and I brought him to the Lord.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm so grateful, because getting rid of all of that junk
enabled you to do that.
Enabled me to do that. Yeah. So I'm so grateful to God. So do you see yourself at all in some of the characters that you write about? Is there like something specific that you've written that you say, oh yeah, I see myself in this?
Yeah. I'm very stubborn. And so I saw that in Felicia. And especially there's a scene where Jackson says something that softens her heart. I mean, she's so angry with him. This is when they're still married. And she's so angry with them, and she can't quite figure out why. It's like, I don't know. He just makes me so mad, and I don't know why. And so he says something that almost breaks her heart.
I remember that part.
Remember the scene?
Oh yeah.
And so she's driving back to their home. Their 7-8-year-old is in the back seat in his, booster seat or whatever, asleep. And as she's reckoning with what Jackson says, then all of a sudden it spins right back around to her, and she becomes angry again. And I thought, yeah, that's so me. Because I have to check things like that at the door.
Oh, I hear you.
In fact, I have one of those 5-year diaries. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but it's 365 questions, 5 years. So it's 1,800 answers.
Wow.
And so what it does is it has the same question at the top of the page. And then you write down the year, it's like 20 blank, 20 blank, 20 blank, 20 blank. So I started it in 2015, because I just finished it. And one of the questions was something along the lines of, I need to do better at blank. And so I just happened to have the book sitting out, and some friends came over. And so the 4 of us are sitting around, and I had a previous marriage as well, but my current husband and I have been married 43 years, I think that's where we are. And so my nosy friend picked up the book, and she says, oh, what's this? And she went to open it, and I jumped up because it's some private thoughts, and I grabbed it and I said, it's a 5-year journal, like a diary, but you're asked one question and you answer it. And then at the end of 5 years, you can go back and see how some of your answers changed. And she said, oh, well, I won't read it, but I mean, like you give me an example. And so I said, well, I just open it up. And it was that page. It's like, I need to do better at. And so I said, so in 2015, I said this, 2016, I said this, 2017. Like 2019, I said, I need to be better at, and then I wrote, being nice to my husband. So my husband goes, that's done. And I said, I still want to work on that. And, it's so funny, because I've really asked God to work on that with me, because all day long, I run Word Weavers, and it's kind of a, we've got 1,000 members, and we've got head mentors and presidents and all of this, right? And trickle down. And so all day long, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. Taryn, can you get this? Jan, can you get that? Da, 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 da. And so I'm, just to keep all the balls and the plates spinning, it's kind of a, we do this. And so then I jump over to Florida Christian Writers Conference, and all right, we got to do this, we need to do that, and that's my personality. It's like, get it done.
Yeah, that's me.
And I walk out of this office, and I still have that attitude.
Yeah.
And I can't have that attitude with my husband. So it's like, I say, to the Lord, there's my office door right there. When I walk through that door, help me check that I'm no longer on, auto boss. So.
I got to tell you, that speaks to me so much. And I am going to really put that into my heart and asking God to help me with that, because I have a home office.
Yeah.
And I
run it.
Yeah, and I run it. And then I'm going to go into a whole different life out there. And lots of times this part of me goes out there. Yeah. And especially all the time together, where, you don't really go many places. And so, and
also as writers, we're in control of whatever it is that we're putting on paper, and our brains are just so zeroed in that, and so one of the things I like to do is in between, like before I walk out of that door, if I can, is to do something what I call normal. Like I'll play a game, I'll play solitaire, or, whatever. Something that just takes me out of, what I'm creating, what I'm doing, except just a little more normal. But it's because that creative, but even like the other night, my husband said something, I don't remember what it was, and I said, "You're right." He says, "Oh, what?"
What was that? Wait a minute, can I tape this?
Yeah. He says, I'm sorry, what? And I'm like, you're right. Well, it was a moment like that worked its way into the Ornament Keeper. If you remember,
yes,
she said to him, "You're right." And he said, "I'm sorry."
Like, what?
So, it was one of those moments. But even remembering to say thank you.
Yeah.
Because my husband does so much to let me in this office 12 hours a day, and to say, thank you for doing that. Thank you he cooks my supper, and say thank you for doing that. And even today, we just came back from the beach, and I started a load of clothes. And so when they were done, I said, because I'm running around like a crazy woman today, now trying to get caught up. And I said, "Would you mind putting those in the dryer?" And he says, "Sure." And it's, thank you.
Yeah.
Even though it's not my job, sort of. We're supposed to be at this together. It's just that it's what I commonly do. And just asking him to do it and him doing it. And the same for me. I mean, if there's something he would commonly do and he asked me to do it and I do it, a thank you means a lot.
Yeah.
So,
it rings so true, because I have to tell you, my husband was a professional chef. And so he allows me to do so much. And today he made homemade pizza, and
my husband does that too. It's
oh my gosh. Yeah. So delicious. And so I took some real quick before I changed my clothes to get on with this, but it is, and it is the object of, but it kind of balances, because I'm more of the tech person. So I help him a lot in those areas. And I've had to learn through a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And, and so we kind of we work together, but I know that there's some things I need to change for me too.
I mean, it's that way for all of us. And I mean, for him, for me, and I think that's kind of the point in the Ornament Keeper, that no one person is wrong and no one person is right in a marriage.
Yep.
It's a little bit of give and a little bit of take. But, in Jackson's case, it was just that feeling of, I'm never going to be enough. And I don't even know what I did, but I just can't break through. And so, figuring that out was a big part for her. But as you know, because you read the book, at the very end, not at the very, very end, but toward the end, he says something, and she realizes all of this has been a misconception. It's all been a mistake, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happens so often, and that's what happened with my parents, is something is said, you misunderstood, or something is done, you misunderstood, you know, he did it, you misunderstood it, whatever. And instead of going and saying, what did you mean by that? Or, you know, that hurt my feelings, or whatever, we bury it. But the problem with burying it is that bitterness will always sprout.
Right.
It's a root it's a seed that will always root, and that root will always sprout. And then once it does, it's to be reckoned with. It's like a weed, you know? So, you know, there's a story in the Bible. It's King David had, I think it was like a captain or a commander or something. His name was Ahithophel. And Ahithophel had a high position in David's army, or, you know, in his palace or whatever. But when Absalom turned against his father, David, Ahithophel went with Absalom. And if you just read that, you know, as is, you think, well, what in the world? I mean, what would make Ahithophel turn his back on his king and someone that he had been serving for so long? That's in the book of Kings. If you go to the book of Chronicles, which of course starts chronicling the names of the fathers and the sons and the grandfathers and the grandsons and all that, you discover that Ahithophel had a granddaughter named Bathsheba. And then all of a sudden you go, aha.
Yeah. And so that is why people skip over all those names. Like, oh, I'm not going to know all these names.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. I say, you know, as an Old Testament scholar, and you know, if somebody says to me, oh, how do you get through all those names? I'm like, let me tell you, if they put those names in there, there was a reason. Sometimes you can figure it out, sometimes you can't. You know, it was more for them to know. They knew who that person was. We don't know who that person is. But every so often, if you'll connect the dots, you start to realize there's a reason why this is in here. And that, there it is right there. Most likely, Ahithophel never forgave David.
Yeah.
Happened with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what a sad, sad story. All of that is. He's one of the greatest kings, you know, Israel ever had. He and his son Solomon.
Yes.
And his son David, Jesus, of course. You know, Jesus, son of David, became the greatest king of Israel. But yet his family life was in such turmoil. And what does that teach us? That should teach us so much.
It really should. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So what's next for you? What are you working on? What are you, thinking about?
Well, I have a novel coming out in March called Dust. And I have about 50 on my street team. They've all gotten the advanced PDF, and I'm so happy. They are just absolutely loving it. I mean, I'm getting emails like, I stayed up all night to read this.
Oh.
On the floor crying. I was ugly crying at the end of it. You know, this is the best thing you've ever written.
Oh my goodness.
So
can you give us a teaser? Can you give us a teaser?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, finish what you were saying. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, I can. I'm going to give you a teaser, but I'm going to have to look it up because I want to do it right. What was I saying? Oh, so far everybody's just loving it, and it took me 2.5 years to write it.
Wow.
So it's, very special to me that anything that took this long, but it was actually inspired by the song Dust in the Wind. It's from the 70s band Kansas.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Yes. And if you I don't know if you know, Kerry Livgren wrote Dust, and he was a band member. He became a believer. And he's like a Sunday school teacher now. And, he left
oh my gosh.
yeah, he left the band and all of that. So my brother and I both, well, especially my brother, loved classic rock. And I was listening to Sirius, XM one day, and that song came on.
Mm.
It just, again, it's the littlest things that will spark a writer,
Yep.
especially a
Yep.
fiction writer. So that comes out in March. Very excited about that. But here's the teaser. Ready?
Okay. All right. Listen, everybody.
Listen, everybody. That's right. Can an ordinary life leave an extraordinary legacy? In 1976, when 19-year-old Allison Middleton receives a proposal of marriage from Wesley Hauser, she eagerly accepts, having no idea the secret Wesley carries, a secret that will change Allison's life forever. Her husband, the man she dreams of being the father of their children, already has a child. Allison rises to the challenge of raising Wesley's toddling daughter as though she were her own. Over the course of their lifetime together, Allison, Wesley, and Michelle form the strong bond of family. As Allison struggles with infertility and finding her way during a time of great change for women, others, some she knows and others whom she never meets, brush and weave against the fabric of her life, leaving her with more questions than answers. From teen bride to grandmother, Allison's life chronicles the ups and downs of an ordinary woman's life to examine the value of what we all leave behind.
Wow.
So it actually begins in 1965 and goes to the present time.
I have the chills already.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the hardest books I've ever written because it's so layered like an onion. And because there are lives that affect her life, people she never meets. Mm-hmm. I realize that this is true. We are affected by the lives of people we will never meet. Yeah. We are all. I mean, we won't even know. We won't have a clue. Maybe when we reach glory, we'll see it as it was. But somebody can come into somebody's life and change their life, and then they make a decision that changes our lives. And we don't even know this person. We never meet this person. Right. But this person will end up altering our lives because of what happened with this first person. Mm-hmm. It was a very complex story. And it took a lot of brain power to write it, but I'm so excited about the release of Dust. And then the next thing I'm working on that I'm currently writing is called The Third Path. Now, this is a nonfiction book, and it's based on what I teach at writers' conferences and what I will be teaching in August alongside Edie Melson. We are going to lead a 1-week spiritual retreat for writers. Really? Crest, North Carolina, in August. I'm so excited. It's called Path to Deep is what the conference is called. Oh my God. The book is titled The Third Path, and it's examining the questions that God asked in the Bible, turning those back onto us, looking at the story behind the question, then asking that question of us, and we have to answer those questions. That's what I teach at writers' conferences today. I used to, always teach fiction, and even some nonfiction. But now I lead a lot of the spiritual tracks, which I think was sorely lacking before. Yeah. We would sing praise and worship, and we would have some uplifting messages, in the general, in the general sessions, some great keynotes. But what about just focusing on our spiritual walk while we're there? And of course, a lot of that is, for the more advanced writers who they've got all the craft stuff, but they're starting to feel lost. And that's very easy to do as a writer, because of just being an artsy person, being creative. Being a creative is, it's a fine line between being a creative and insanity.
Yeah. I I understand that totally. Well, I so love that. I will say that, when I was talking earlier about my first, conference that I went to, I am
Mhm.
now in a place where by the end of December, I will have my first children's book written
Ooh,
in my first draft, but I
yay.
never thought I would ever be doing what I'm doing and writing a children's book and having to think like a 10-year-old.
Right,
And
right. Yeah.
so it is, I just love what you're doing so much. I
Thank
really
you.
do. And I know that,
Yeah.
being somebody who's not as experienced as you or a lot of other authors, I still consider myself a newbie, even though it's 4 years.
Yeah.
Uh, I need the support and I need to hear the wisdom,
Hmm.
from individuals like you and others, and there's others in my life that I know, have spoken into my life and I so appreciate it. And I know
Yeah.
we all need what you're talking about. So
Yeah. Well, again, especially when you're a creative as a Christian and you're pouring into the Christian market,
mhm,
you're pouring out.
yes.
And so often in that pouring out process, we think that we are being ministered to by our own pouring out. And there is, I mean, I can't write anything that I'm not, like that's nonfiction, like The Final Race, etc., that doesn't somehow end up ministering to me. It's still pouring out.
Yeah.
So, pretty soon you look around and you realize I'm empty. I don't have anything left.
Yeah.
And that's where things like The Third Path and Path to Deep and Soul Care, which Edie Melson wrote, it will come into play. Because if you don't keep filling up, eventually there's nothing left to give.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's a very dry place. I've been there, done that. So I know. And God revealing those questions to me came at a time when I was starting to unravel. Didn't quite realize it yet. I think God caught me just in time,
Mhm.
but I was truly starting to unravel. And um, between those questions, and I spent a week at the learning feet of Robert Benson,
Yeah.
who's just a marvelous writer and spiritual leader. Um, that was that kind of, and then writing The Final Race. All three of those things happened in the same year.
Oh.
So that was for me just like there it was. The light bulb went off. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be connecting with you next year and have you come back again, if you will, with your new
Yes.
book.
Absolutely.
I would just be so,
Absolutely.
I can't wait to read it. So I'll be
Well, you're
looking
on my
for it.
list to get it.
All
So
right, awesome. That's wonderful. So I just want to, first of all, thank you again for taking your time to be with us. I so appreciate you and just your genuineness and your ability to not only, we're not on here just to talk about your books, but you give so much when you're on as well.
oh,
And
thanks.
I just really appreciate that. And I want to wish everybody, this has been a year, obviously 2020, with COVID and everything, a year where, everybody's lives have changed. People have lost, family members and friends. But I think that in my heart, I'm just continually looking for the joy of Jesus and believing that, there's always hope. There's always a new year coming.
Mhm.
And there are some things, I was looking at this yesterday, there are some things in my life that I want to leave behind in 2020
Yeah.
and not carry them forward into 2021. So I'm
Yeah.
asking God to help me with that as well. But if you could maybe just close us out in whatever way you feel led to. I just want to say thank you again. I'm Joe Massaro with joemassaroministries.com. You can find all kinds of authors on there as well. This will be on there tonight. You'll be able to find the book. So you not only see the video, but you can also have an opportunity by clicking on there to purchase the book. Enjoy and have a blessed, blessed, blessed Christmas.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that about 2020. And yeah, it's been such a rough year. And even back in March, I kept saying, if we can just get to Christmas, if we can just get to Christmas, because what happens at Christmas every year is it seems like we set aside our differences and we just come together and we celebrate. We get into the season, we're singing Christmas carols, we're buying gifts, and we're receiving gifts and we're putting up the lights and it just something seems to happen. That statement from the angels, peace on earth, goodwill toward all men, on whom God's favor rests. I mean, just that just seems to be the ticket. And so here we are. We finally made it to December. And I mean, if you think back, I mean, it wasn't just COVID. It was all the racial unrest and the civil unrest, the elections.
Yeah.
It was just
Everything.
such a year, and the lack of toilet paper, what was that about?
Oh, wait, can I share this with you?
Yeah.
I just got a case of toilet paper. And my husband thought I was crazy. And it just happened that's how it was sold.
Yeah.
And, I just put it in a closet and I said, you never know.
You never know. Well, and I don't know about you, but my parents both, especially my mom, being a child of the Depression. And oh gosh, I can remember how she just bought things in bulk because you never know. And now I kind of understand that. And, even when it was happening, I would say, people, it's not a gastrointestinal disease. I don't know what this thing with toilet paper was, but it was like, it just caught on.
People panicked.
But, it's just been a crazy year all the way around, but we made it to Christmas. And let's take that into the new year.
Yes, amen.
Not pick up the old, angst and bitterness and sorrows and sicknesses and things like that, because, it's just a breeding ground. It really is. Hate and bitterness and resentment is a breeding ground. Love and peace and joy and comfort. I mean, that's what God is about. And so I hope and pray, that's my Christmas prayer for all of us this year, is that we will hold on to the joy of Christmas and carry it into 2021. And just know that everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. No matter what happens, everything's going to be all right. I know, I've read the end of the book.
Maybe, you know what, this song just came to me, and maybe if you want to jump in, I'm only going to sing one little verse. Because
I'm not going to sing.
My asthma's kind of kicking up a little bit here, so forgive me if I sound a little throaty here. But silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin, mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in a heavenly peace, sleep in a heavenly peace.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you again.
Yes.
See why I love this lady? Not only is she a great writer, but she's a wonderful woman of God. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will
lots of love to you too.
All right, honey.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.